Title: The Lost Souls of Sacred Heart Seminary. Part 1. The Disappeared. Hook. In the quiet hills of central Illinois, where the wind rustles through tall prairie grass and the sky seems endless, there stands a forgotten place with a dark secret. It's not on tourist maps, and most locals won't talk about it. But if you dig deep enough, beneath dusty church records and sealed Vatican files, you'll find a name whispered by historians and feared by the Church: Sacred Heart Seminary. Between 1847 and 1862, 17 young men vanished from this holy institution. Not one trace. The Church said they had gone on missions, or spiritual retreats. But hidden letters found beneath the chapel floor tell a different story, one of murder, lies, and a twisted web of power. This isn't just a ghost story. It's a story the Church buried for over a century. And tonight, we're digging it up. If you're brave enough to hear what really happened inside Sacred Heart, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because this nightmare didn't stay locked in Illinois, it could have happened anywhere. Part 1. The Disappeared. The year was 1847. America was young, restless, and filled with opportunity and danger. On the open plains of central Illinois, 40 miles southwest of Chicago, the Catholic Church built a grand new seminary. It was called Sacred Heart. 400 acres of quiet farmland, with a 3-story brick building that rose like a castle in the middle of the prairie. It looked like a place of peace. But it would soon become a house of horrors. Why was Sacred Heart built? Because the Church needed something new. In the 1840s, Irish immigrants were pouring into American cities, fleeing hunger, war, and death. The potato famine had crushed Ireland. Over 1 million dead. Those who survived came to America looking for hope. But what they found here wasn't always better. Many Americans, especially Protestants, hated Catholics. They thought Catholicism was dangerous, un-American. Priests were attacked in the streets. Churches burned. Nuns were chased from their convents by angry mobs. In this harsh climate, the Church knew it needed priests who looked and sounded like Americans. Men without thick accents. Men who could calm the fear, build trust, and help the faith survive. So, Sacred Heart was born. It was meant to be a bridge, a place where Irish clergy could train young American men to serve the Church. A symbol of hope in a dangerous time. And on the outside, it worked. The seminary building was a marvel for its time. Designed by famous Irish architect Patrick Keeley, it had tall windows that flooded the halls with light, wooden pews hand-carved in Bavaria, and a bell tower that rang across the prairie. It had indoor plumbing, gas lighting, and a central furnace, luxuries unheard of in most rural areas. Its library was one of the best west of the Mississippi, filled with rare books on theology, science, and literature. Wealthy Catholic families from Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Louis donated thousands to make it happen. But behind the beauty, something evil was growing. It started with the man in charge, Father Superior Edmund Walsh. He came from County Cork, Ireland, with letters of praise from bishops across Europe. He was a giant of a man, over 6 feet tall, with steel-gray eyes and a silver beard. He spoke like a scholar, quoting Latin and Greek from memory, reciting lines from St. Augustine like it was bedtime poetry. He claimed to have studied at the great Maynooth Seminary in Ireland and to hold degrees in philosophy, canon law, and classical languages. He seemed too good to be true. And he was. Beside him stood Rector Thomas Murphy and Dean Patrick O'Brien. Both were brilliant, well-spoken, and carried impressive letters of recommendation. Murphy said he had studied in Belgium and worked with the Bishop of Cork. O'Brien claimed to have published theological works in London. They dressed like priests. They preached like priests. They lived like holy men. But according to the letters found under the chapel floorboards, they were liars. All of them. Not a single one was ordained. They weren't priests at all. They were criminals, Irish con men who had murdered the original clergy sent from Dublin, burned their bodies in the furnace, and stolen their identities. For 15 years, these impostors ran Sacred Heart. And during that time, 17 young men vanished. The Church said they had been transferred. Some were listed as going to missions in the South, or extended retreats. But none of their families ever saw them again. No one received letters. No one returned home. Now, imagine this. You're a 17-year-old boy from a poor Catholic family. You've been called to serve God. You leave everything behind, your home, your mother, your childhood, and travel across the country to Sacred Heart Seminary. You walk into this massive brick building, ready to become a priest. But inside, something is wrong. The leaders are strict, cold, watching your every move. Some students whisper about punishments that don't make sense. About classmates who are suddenly gone, without goodbye or explanation. You start to wonder if you'll be next. That's what those 17 young men faced. According to the hidden letters, written in shaky Latin and stuffed between floorboards, the truth was darker than anyone imagined. These fake priests weren't just criminals. They were traffickers. They used the seminary as a cover to sell young men, into slavery, into forced labor, or worse. And they didn't act alone. The letters suggest higher officials in the church may have known, and helped cover it up. After all, Sacred Heart was important. It was a symbol. It couldn't fail, not in the eyes of Catholic America. So, they erased the names, burned the papers, sealed the records. For 150 years, the Vatican kept the truth locked away. Until now. Outro. Next time, we'll dig deeper into how these imposters fooled everyone, from bishops to governors, and why no one stopped them. The clues were there, but no one wanted to see them. If you're just as shocked as we are, leave a comment below. What would you do if your brother disappeared in a place like this? What if the people you trusted most were the ones hiding the truth? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This is only part 1 of a 10-part journey into America's forgotten religious horror. Coming up next, part 2, The Founding Lies. Where did the fake priests come from? And who helped them cover it up? The Lost Souls of Sacred Heart Seminary. Part 2, The First to Vanish. Approximately 1,000 words, easy, engaging English for American audience. Dean Patrick O'Brien was the youngest of the 3 leaders at Sacred Heart Seminary, probably no more than 35, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. He had a warm smile, a smooth voice, and a gift for making even the most complex church teachings sound simple and clear. O'Brien claimed to have studied classical languages and church history at the Royal University of Ireland. His sermons were powerful and emotional, often moving students and visitors to tears. O'Brien told stories of his time as a chaplain to wealthy Irish families, and he carried himself like someone raised in high society. He knew which fork to use, how to greet a bishop, and when to stay silent. His polished manners impressed the American Catholic elite. Church donors and visiting priests saw him as a rising star. Together, O'Brien, Rector Thomas Murphy, and Father Superior Edmund Walsh formed a powerful trio. They were educated, well-spoken, and deeply religious, or so it seemed. They convinced even the sharpest church leaders they were the right men to run Sacred Heart. Bishop William Corder of Chicago, who had final authority over the seminary, was so impressed with their credentials that he gave them full control of the institution. It was an unusual decision, but no one questioned it. In the fall of 1847, Sacred Heart opened its doors to its first class, 12 young men between 18 and 25. They came from different cities across the Midwest, all Catholic, all full of dreams, and all handpicked by the 3 priests. Heinrich Müller and Johann Weber were sons of German immigrants in Milwaukee. Their families had scraped together their savings to send them to the seminary. Patrick Kelly and Sean O'Malley were from wealthy Irish families in Chicago. Their parents believed becoming a priest would bring their sons, and their family, greater respect. Antoine Dubois came from a French Catholic family in Detroit, whose fortune had grown from the fur trade. Even 2 Protestant converts, Thomas Morrison and David Anderson, had found their way into the program, drawn by their deep faith and personal conviction. Each student believed they were answering God's call. What they didn't know was that they had been selected for more sinister reasons. Walsh, Murphy, and O'Brien had developed specific criteria: family wealth to pay high tuition, physical strength for labor, education for future roles, and, most importantly, isolation. The more alone a student was in the world, the easier it would be for him to disappear without anyone asking too many questions. Life at Sacred Heart seemed strict but holy. Students rose at 4:30 a.m. for morning prayer, attended Mass at 5 o'clock, and followed a full schedule of classes, study, and physical work. The seminary grounds were beautiful but massive, and students were expected to help maintain them. The curriculum was tough: Latin and Greek, philosophy and theology, church history, moral teachings, canon law, sermon writing, Bible studies. Students studied from dawn until after dark. The 3 priests enforced absolute obedience. They said it was necessary for spiritual growth. But rules went beyond normal discipline. Students could only write letters home once a month. No student was allowed to leave the grounds without written permission. And visits to the nearby town of Millfield were rare, and closely watched. Letters in and out were inspected, to keep students focused on God. But really, the goal was control. Total control. Then came the first disappearance. It happened during the brutal blizzard of February 1848, just 5 months after the seminary opened. Snow had fallen non-stop for 3 days. Drifts rose to second-story windows. Roads were blocked. The outside world couldn't reach the seminary, and no one inside could leave. It was the perfect moment. Michael Brennan was 22, from a well-off Irish family in Chicago. His parents owned 3 grocery stores. They had saved for years to pay for Michael's education, over $200 a year. They saw the priesthood as a noble path for their son and a proud achievement for their family. Michael was a star student, sharp in his theology classes, quiet, focused, respectful. Father Walsh had taken special interest in him, recently giving him access to the seminary's financial records and letting him assist with correspondence. Michael wrote home proudly about it, thanking his parents for their support. He said he wanted to serve both God and the Irish community with honor. He sounded happy, focused, grateful. That made what happened next even more shocking. On the snowy night of February 13, 1848, Michael was seen walking toward Father Walsh's office around 8:30 p.m., carrying his leather portfolio filled with notes and assignments. Several students watched him pass through the hallway. Walsh's office was in the far end of the seminary, separated from the dorms by thick stone walls. Around 9 p.m., students reported hearing raised voices coming from that direction. Not words, just angry shouting. The argument lasted nearly an hour. Then, silence. A strange stillness settled over the seminary. Michael's roommate and best friend, Joseph Kennedy, stayed up late, waiting for him. Midnight came and went. No sign of Michael. Joseph assumed Michael had been allowed to rest in the administrative wing after a long meeting. But when morning came, and Michael missed 4:30 prayers, something he had never done, Joseph began to worry. He checked the chapel, the study room, the kitchen, nothing. He quietly asked other students if they had seen Michael. Most shook their heads. He approached Father Murphy, who simply said Michael had been sent on a private errand and would return shortly. But days passed, then weeks. Michael never returned. When his parents wrote to ask how he was doing, they received a short reply. It said Michael had decided to take a sudden spiritual retreat and had asked not to be contacted. The family was confused, but they trusted the church. After all, who would suspect a seminary? What Joseph Kennedy didn't know, and what no one outside those stone walls could have imagined, was that Michael Brennan had become the first student to vanish. But he wouldn't be the last. Coming next. Part 3, Chapel of Silence. Why were certain areas of the seminary off limits? And what secrets did the chapel's foundation hide? The Lost Souls of Sacred Heart Seminary. Part 3, The Chapel Below. The morning after Michael Brennan's disappearance, Sacred Heart students gathered in the seminary chapel for Mass, expecting an announcement or update. What they got instead was a carefully crafted tale. Father Walsh, standing tall at the carved wooden pulpit, spoke with a solemn voice and downcast eyes. He told them that Michael had received an urgent midnight request to minister to a Catholic community near the Iowa border, struck hard by a cholera outbreak. Their local priest had died suddenly, leaving the sick and dying without spiritual comfort. Despite his youth and incomplete training, Walsh said, Michael had bravely volunteered to go. It was, in Walsh's words, a sign of true priestly courage, a sacrifice that would be remembered by the church forever. At first, the story made sense. Cholera outbreaks were real and deadly. Many priests had lost their lives tending to the sick. The idea that Michael had stepped forward in faith made him a hero. But Joseph Kennedy, Michael's roommate and closest friend, wasn't convinced. He'd known Michael better than anyone. They had shared a room, their dreams, their doubts. And not once had Michael mentioned any plan to leave. In fact, just the night before, he'd been full of excitement about his growing responsibilities and his future in moral theology. Even stranger, Michael's heavy winter coat, boots, and gloves still hung neatly in their shared wardrobe. No one traveled in the middle of an Illinois winter without those. Temperatures had dropped to 15 below zero that night. A journey to Iowa without proper gear would have been suicide. But the most troubling clue was the rosary. Michael had brought it with him from home, a silver chain once owned by his grandmother, who died during the Irish famine. He never let it out of his sight. And yet, there it was, lying on his bedside table. Joseph quietly approached Father Walsh after Mass to express his confusion. What he received was not comfort, but punishment. Walsh's expression changed instantly. His voice turned cold. He accused Joseph of spiritual arrogance, of doubting church authority. He warned that questioning the decisions of one's superiors was the first step toward damnation. As penance, Joseph was ordered to spend a full week in solitary reflection, in the seminary's basement chapel. It was not a place anyone wanted to be. The basement chapel sat beneath the main building, carved into the hillside and reachable only by a narrow, creaking staircase. It was damp, cold, and dark. The stone walls constantly dripped with moisture. The only heat came from a small brazier, and the only light came from candles that Joseph had to tend himself. It was meant for silence and prayer. But what Joseph heard during those nights would haunt him forever. Each night, around 2 a.m., long after the rest of the seminary had gone still, Joseph would hear the sound of horses. Hooves crunching over frozen earth. Wagon wheels groaning beneath weight. The sounds came from directly above. Voices followed, low, hushed, but familiar. Walsh, Murphy, O'Brien. He couldn't hear their words, but he knew those voices anywhere. Then would come the sounds of something heavy being dragged across the ground. Grunts. The creak of wagon springs under shifting weight. From the basement chapel's single, dirt-caked window, Joseph saw flickering lanterns moving in the dark. On the third night, he pressed his face close to the glass and saw them, 3 men lifting a large, wrapped bundle into the back of a covered wagon. They moved carefully, slowly, not like men lifting crates, but like men handling something fragile. Something human. The wagon always left heading west, toward Springfield, not toward Iowa or Chicago. By morning, the seminary returned to normal. No mention of wagons. No explanation. But Joseph knew. Michael had not left to serve cholera victims. He had been taken. And now, someone else was about to disappear. 6 weeks later, it happened again. Thomas Gallagher was one of the most respected students in the seminary. Quiet, kind, deeply devout. The kind of man who helped classmates with Latin, who volunteered for extra chores, who prayed long after others had gone to sleep. His parents had given everything for his education. His father had worked his way up from brewery laborer to foreman. His mother sewed and cleaned for 16 hours a day. They'd sold their farm to afford Sacred Heart's tuition, moving to a cramped apartment just to support their son's dream of becoming a priest. Thomas took that responsibility seriously. He often told his friends that he would do anything to make his parents proud. On the evening of March 30, 1848, Thomas was approached by Dean O'Brien just after prayers. O'Brien looked somber. He told Thomas that Father Walsh needed to speak with him about an urgent matter involving his academic record. Thomas was confused. He hadn't missed a single class or failed an exam. Probably a clerical mistake, he joked to his friend Heinrich Weber. But by 9 p.m., the other students near Walsh's office heard raised voices, again. First soft, then louder. Thomas's voice, unmistakably distressed, broke through the walls. The arguing continued for over 2 hours. At 10:30 p.m., there were loud thuds. The sound of furniture being pushed. Silence followed. Then, just past 11 o'clock, the now familiar sound of a wagon creaking away into the darkness. The next morning, Father Walsh addressed the student body. He said that Thomas had confessed to struggling with impure thoughts. That he had broken under the weight of his calling. And that, in an act of shame and self-denial, he had left before sunrise to join a silent monastery in the Wisconsin wilderness. It was a believable story. Many young men struggled with celibacy. And some did seek retreat in isolated monastic life. But Heinrich knew better. Thomas's rosary, a wooden one hand carved by his dying mother, was still on his desk. His letter to his sister, half finished, sat nearby. The last sentence read, "I wake each morning grateful to God for guiding me to this holy place." And then it stopped. No signature. No goodbye. Even the $50 his parents had given him, enough to feed their family for a month, remained untouched in Father Walsh's office. Thomas hadn't left in shame. He had been taken, and the students were beginning to realize that something evil lived among them. Next up. Part 4, The Bell Tower's Shadow. What secrets did the priests keep locked in the upper levels of the seminary, and what did one curious student find when he climbed where no one was allowed to go? Shall I continue with Part 4? The Lost Souls of Sacred Heart Seminary. Part 4. The Bell Tower's Shadow. There was one place at Sacred Heart that all students were told to avoid, the Bell Tower. It loomed over the seminary like a silent guardian, its tall, narrow spire reaching into the gray Illinois sky. The bells had not rung in years. No mass, no funeral, no feast day stirred them. When asked why, Father Murphy always gave the same answer: they are out of tune, and too costly to repair. But the tower wasn't just silent. It was locked, always. A thick iron door sealed its base, and the key never left Father Walsh's possession. The students joked that even the saints couldn't get in. But in March of 1848, after Thomas Gallagher's mysterious disappearance, one student decided to find out what the priests were hiding. His name was Elias Quinn. Thin, curious, and clever, Elias had a knack for slipping unnoticed through places he shouldn't be. He had grown up on the streets of Boston, orphaned by fire, and taken in by a group of traveling Catholic missionaries. They fed him, clothed him, and gave him purpose. When he was old enough, they sent him to Sacred Heart, believing the boy had a calling. But Elias had not forgotten how to survive, how to listen, how to move in the shadows. The night after Thomas vanished, Elias waited until the priests went to bed. At 1 a.m., he crept from his cot, past the sleeping forms of his fellow students, and into the empty hallway. The building was silent, but a soft wind moaned through the stone walls, like a ghost remembering its name. He carried only a candle and a bent wire he had shaped into a crude lockpick. The seminary's halls were filled with creaking floorboards, but Elias moved carefully. He reached the tower door and got to work. The lock was stubborn, rusted, but not immune to time and clever hands. After several long minutes, it clicked. The door groaned as it opened. Inside, a narrow spiral staircase twisted upward into blackness. The stone steps were worn, each one bowed slightly in the middle. Elias counted them as he climbed. 48, then 60, then 80. He passed boarded-up windows, dust-covered crucifixes, and cold drafty corners where rats had chewed through forgotten hymnals. Halfway up, the air changed. It was no longer just cold, it was metallic. Sharp, a scent like old blood and candle wax. Elias pressed on, candle trembling in his hand. At the top of the stairs, he found another door. This one was wooden and warped, its hinges eaten with rust. But it wasn't locked, just barred from the inside with a heavy crossbeam. He slid it free and pushed the door open. What he saw froze him in place. The bell chamber was no longer a bell chamber. The great bells still hung above, but below them, the space had been turned into something else entirely. A ritual chamber. The floor was painted with symbols Elias didn't recognize: circles, triangles, letters in a language older than Latin. Candles burned in a perfect ring, casting shadows that danced like living things. At the center stood a table. Not a desk, not an altar, a table. Its surface was stained dark, and leather straps hung from its sides, restraints for wrists and ankles. Nearby, a basin of water, several metal tools, a crucifix carved entirely from black wood. And then, a sound. A faint moan. Elias's eyes darted to the far wall, where a curtain had been hung from ceiling to floor. Behind it, something shifted. He stepped forward, 1 foot, then another. He reached out and pulled the curtain aside. There, chained to the stone wall, was a boy. Barefoot, eyes shut, lips cracked, clothes torn. It was Thomas Gallagher, alive, but barely. Thomas's eyes fluttered open at the light. His voice was dry as dust. "Help me," he whispered. "Please." Elias rushed forward, fumbling with the chains. They were locked, tight, and the key was nowhere in sight. He whispered to Thomas, begged him to hold on, told him he'd be back with help. But just as he turned to go, footsteps echoed on the stairs. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Elias snuffed his candle and dove behind a pile of old bell cloths in the corner. The door creaked open. 3 men entered: Walsh, Murphy, O'Brien. They did not speak. They walked straight to Thomas. Father Walsh knelt by the table, his voice soft like a lullaby. "You've resisted long enough," he said. "But the soul bends eventually." He reached for something behind the table, a small glass vial filled with thick red liquid. He lifted it high. "Drink, and you'll be reborn." Thomas turned his head. "No," he rasped. "Not this way." O'Brien stepped forward, gripping Thomas's jaw. Elias had seen enough. He slipped from the cloths, through the door, and down the stairs, heart racing, legs burning. Behind him, he heard nothing. No shouts, no footsteps, just silence. When he reached the dormitory, he didn't wake the others. He went straight to Joseph Kennedy. And told him everything. The next morning, Thomas Gallagher was gone. Again. This time, there was no explanation. No speech from Walsh. No letter. No lie. Just silence. and a locked tower door. But Elias and Joseph knew the truth. And they were not going to let it happen again. Next up. Part 5, The Eyes of the Virgin. A strange painting in the chapel watches every student who kneels before it, but what secrets are hidden in its brushstrokes? Shall I continue with Part 5? The Lost Souls of Sacred Heart Seminary. Part 5, The Eyes of the Virgin. It was the oldest object at Sacred Heart Seminary, the painting of the Virgin Mary above the chapel altar. Framed in thick, black walnut wood, it stood taller than a man and wider than two. Mary was cloaked in deep blue, hands folded in prayer, eyes turned gently downward. It was said to be over 200 years old, brought from a ruined Spanish mission in Mexico and gifted to the seminary's first bishop. But to Joseph Kennedy, it had never felt like a blessing. Even as a child, kneeling on the hard wooden pews, he'd felt those painted eyes watching him, never kind, never calm. They didn't feel holy, they felt hungry. After Elias told him about the bell tower and Thomas's imprisonment, Joseph became more alert. Every shadow felt alive, every priest's smile looked hollow. And then, the painting began to change. At first, Joseph thought it was his imagination. But on the first Sunday of April, during morning mass, he noticed it clearly. The Virgin's eyes had shifted. They were no longer looking downward in peace. They were looking directly at him. He turned to Elias, who sat beside him in the pew. "Do you see it?" Joseph whispered. Elias nodded slowly. "She's watching." They both stared for several seconds. Then the Virgin blinked. Not a trick of light. A slow, human blink. Joseph and Elias skipped communion that day. They left the chapel the moment mass ended and returned late that night, candles hidden beneath their cloaks. They slipped through the side door, now familiar with its loose hinges and soft floorboards. The chapel was silent, thick with the smell of old incense and melting wax. The painting loomed in the moonlight. "She's not alive," Elias whispered. "It's the painting, not her." Joseph stepped closer. The Virgin's eyes still stared straight ahead, wide, glassy, too real. Then he saw something he'd never noticed before. Tiny letters carved along the bottom of the wooden frame. Not English, not Latin, Greek. Joseph had studied it last semester. He traced his finger along the letters and slowly sounded them out. Icons Anton, Corte and Fury, Living Image, Gates of Hell, .. They didn't sleep that night. The next morning, they skipped class and ran to the seminary library. Few students used it, just cold shelves of dusty theology books and church records. They searched for hours until Elias pulled out an old catalogue of sacred relics, written in both Spanish and Latin. There it was, a record from 1624. A painting, origin unknown, recovered from the ruins of San Maria del Silencio, Nuevo Leon, Mexico. Locals report visions, illness, and unexplained disappearances among clergy. The object was transferred north to Illinois for containment in 1781. There was a symbol next to the record. The same symbol Elias had seen painted in the bell tower. A circle inside a triangle. A black sun. "This isn't just a painting," Elias whispered. "It's part of something bigger." "Whatever it is," Joseph said, "the priests brought it here on purpose." They needed to test it. That night, while the seminary slept, they returned to the chapel with a mirror. Elias had read that cursed images often revealed their true form only when reflected. They propped the mirror across from the painting and lit a single candle. In the flickering flame, the Virgin Mary stared back at them. But in the mirror, she was different. Her eyes were hollow, her hands were claws, and behind her, where heaven should have glowed, there were screaming faces, twisted, ghost-like, trapped in paint. Joseph dropped the candle. Darkness swallowed the room, and then came the sound. A whisper, low, hissing, not from the painting, from the walls, from the floorboards, from the crucifix above the altar. "Return what you have stolen." Elias pulled Joseph toward the exit. As they fled, the air turned heavy. The floor groaned. The Virgin's eyes followed them even in darkness. They didn't speak again until they reached the dormitory. The next morning, the painting was gone. Vanished. In its place above the altar was a plain wooden cross. No announcement, no explanation, but Joseph and Elias saw the truth in the priest's eyes. Fear, even they had lost control. And something else was now awake. Next up. Part 6, The Priest with No Tongue. A new priest arrives to replace Father O'Brien, but his silence hides more than just obedience. Would you like me to continue with Part 6? The Lost Souls of Sacred Heart Seminary. Part 6. The Priest with No Tongue. 3 days after the Virgin Mary painting vanished, a new priest arrived at Sacred Heart Seminary. No one had heard his name. No carriage dropped him off. He simply appeared one morning, standing near the chapel, wearing a black cassock, a wool coat, and dark round glasses. His face was pale and gaunt, his hair slicked back like wet ash. He spoke to no one, not the rector, not the other priests, not the students. And when Joseph Kennedy tried to greet him, the man just stared and pressed one finger to his lips. Silence. At breakfast, whispers traveled faster than the steam from the kitchen. "He's here to replace Father O'Brien," Elias said. But no one saw him speak. "They say he has no tongue," another student whispered. "Cut it out for some vow. Or punishment." Joseph stared across the dining hall. The priest sat alone, unmoving, not eating. Just watching, like he was waiting for something. That night, Joseph had a dream. He stood alone in the chapel. The altar was cracked, the cross above it was broken. The painting of the Virgin returned, but now the canvas was dripping red. The new priest was there. He stepped forward, removed his glasses, and opened his mouth. Inside was nothing. No teeth, no tongue, just a black void that breathed like lungs and pulsed like a heart. Joseph woke gasping. The next day, a classmate went missing. His name was Henry Pike. 17, quiet, well-liked, last seen near the chapel, cleaning candle holders after evening prayers. By morning, his bed was empty, the sheets untouched. Father O'Brien, still recovering from his mysterious wounds, said nothing. The new priest remained silent. But Joseph saw it in his face, he already knew. Joseph and Elias searched for Henry. They skipped class, slipped into locked hallways, checked the cellar and the dormitory attic. But no signs. Except one. Under Henry's bed, Joseph found a strip of old cloth. Dark red, brittle, like it had been soaked in blood. Embroidered on the edge was a faded symbol. The black sun inside a triangle. "Same as the bell tower," Elias whispered. "Same as the relic book." They were beginning to understand. This seminary wasn't a school. It was a prison, not for boys, but for something far older. And the new priest wasn't here to help. He was a warden. Late one night, Elias disappeared too. Joseph woke to find his friend's bed empty, sheets torn, the window cracked open though they lived on the second floor. No blood, no footprints, just silence. And on the desk beside Elias's bed, one thing remained. A page from the library's old relic book, torn and stained. On it was a hand-drawn map of the seminary. But not as it was now. This map showed hidden floors beneath the chapel, deep tunnels and sealed chambers. At the very bottom, in Latin, 4 words. Ad portum mortuorum, to the gate of the dead. Joseph had nothing left to lose. The next night, he followed the map. Through the chapel, down the back hallway, past the supply closet where light bulbs flickered. He pried open a loose floor tile behind the altar. Underneath, a spiral staircase of stone. It spiraled down into blackness. He lit a candle and descended. The air was cold and wet. The walls were carved with the same symbol, black suns and twisting shapes. The deeper he went, the louder a low humming grew. Like chanting, but not in any human language. At the bottom, he found a wooden door with iron hinges. Behind it, the room was circular, lined with bones, skulls arranged in perfect rows. In the center stood the new priest. His cassock was gone, his body was covered in black marks, ancient writing burned into skin. He turned toward Joseph and opened his mouth. That same black void, but now it spoke. "You cannot stop it." The floor cracked, a stone altar rose from the center. And Elias was there, tied down, eyes wide, lips sewn shut. The priest raised a dagger made of bone. But Joseph ran. He didn't think. He didn't fight. He just ran. He didn't stop until he burst into the rector's office, panting, screaming for help. But the rector didn't ask questions. He didn't even look surprised. He just said, "You should not have gone below." Next up. Part 7, The Chamber of Silence. Joseph returns underground, and discovers the ancient order that rules Sacred Heart from the shadows. Would you like me to continue with Part 7? The Lost Souls of Sacred Heart Seminary. Part 7, The Chamber of Silence. After Joseph's wild escape from the tunnels beneath the chapel, he expected to be punished. Instead, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The rector said nothing. The new priest had vanished. No one mentioned Elias. The seminary acted as if nothing had happened. But Joseph couldn't pretend, not after what he had seen. He began writing down everything, names, symbols, maps, dreams, anything he could remember. He hid the pages beneath a loose floorboard under his bed. He wasn't sure why. Maybe someone would find them. Maybe they'd believe him. Or maybe not, because something strange was happening to him too. He stopped dreaming. Every night, his sleep was black and empty. And when he woke up, the candle on his desk was always burned down, even when he hadn't lit it. A week later, during a thunderstorm, Joseph was summoned to the rector's office. The hallway smelled of damp stone and old oil. He entered the office slowly. The door closed behind him without a sound. The rector sat in his chair, hands folded, face calm. "You've seen the gate," the rector said without emotion. Joseph said nothing. "You are not the first," he continued. "But you may be the last." The rector stood, walked to a shelf, and removed an old leather-bound book. He opened it to a page covered in symbols. "This is the Chamber of Silence," he said, tapping the page. "It lies deeper than the tunnels you entered. It is where the vows are made." "What vows?" Joseph asked. The rector looked at him, eyes dark as coal. "To serve the old order. To keep the gate sealed. To silence the blood. That night, Joseph couldn't stop thinking about Elias. He knew he had to go back. He followed the map again, this time descending with purpose. Deeper, farther, past the bone room, past the stone altar, until he found a second door. Carved into it, "Siler et Servire." Be silent and serve. Joseph pushed it open. Inside was a massive chamber, round like a theater. In the center stood 12 figures in black robes. Their faces were hidden, their hands were marked with black sun tattoos. At their feet knelt Elias. Alive, but changed. His eyes were pale and unblinking. His mouth was still sewn shut, but he didn't struggle. He just stared forward, silent as a statue. The 12 figures began to chant. Low, deep, ancient. Joseph crept closer, heart pounding. One of the robed figures turned. It was the new priest. His eyes met Joseph's, and for a moment, Joseph heard a voice in his head. "Join us, or vanish." Joseph stepped back, but behind him, the door closed. The 12 raised their hands. From the ceiling, black strings hung like spider webs. They attached themselves to Elias, wrapping around his arms, his chest, his head. Elias did not resist. He simply bowed his head. Joseph screamed, "Let him go," but his voice didn't echo. It was swallowed by the chamber. A priest grabbed him from behind. Joseph struggled, kicked, shouted, but the silence was thick and heavy, like drowning in air. They dragged him toward the center. Toward the gate. It stood like a mirror, tall and arched, but its surface shimmered like water. Behind it, shadows, movement, hands pressed against the glass. Not human hands. The new priest stepped forward and raised the bone dagger again. But then, Elias blinked, and mouthed something. "Run, ." Joseph didn't wait. He broke free, elbowed the priest in the face, and grabbed a torch from the wall. He swung it wildly, sending flames toward the ropes and robes. The chamber erupted in confusion. Chanting broke. The mirror surface cracked. Screams echoed, not from the room, but from behind the gate. Joseph ran, through the tunnels, up the stone stairs, out into the chapel, and as he burst into the cold night air, lightning struck the bell tower. The building shook. For a moment, Joseph turned back. The chapel windows glowed red. And then, went dark. That night, most of the seminary slept through the storm. But Joseph didn't sleep at all. He packed a small bag, took his hidden pages, and left through the side gate. No one stopped him, no one followed, but he knew it wasn't over. Some doors, once opened, never truly close. Next up. Part 8, The Bells Never Ring. Sacred Heart Seminary remains silent, but its tower holds a secret no one dares to face, until a new arrival begins to ask the wrong questions. Shall I continue with Part 8? The Lost Souls of Sacred Heart Seminary. Part 8. The Bells Never Ring. 6 months passed after Joseph Kennedy disappeared from Sacred Heart Seminary. The official story was that he ran away. The students were told not to talk about him. His belongings were removed. His name was erased from the roll book. Even the younger boys were warned, disobedience leads to darkness. But there was one thing they couldn't erase. The bell tower never rang again. Once, its deep chime had called the boys to prayer, meals, and class. Now, it stood silent. Its windows dark, its rope missing, its great bell unmoving, like it had been frozen in time. Some said the lightning strike broke it. Others claimed it was a sign from God. But one boy didn't believe either. His name was Peter Graves. Peter had arrived just 1 week ago. 14. Smart. Curious. Too curious. He quickly noticed how strange the place felt. Cold, even in July. Quiet, even during daylight. The teachers were stiff and formal. The rector smiled too much, and it never reached his eyes. And none of the boys talked about the tower, or the chapel, or Elias Pike, whose empty bed still sat untouched. Peter started asking questions. He got no answers, just warnings. From teachers, keep your head down. From students, don't look at the paintings too long. From the cook, don't be out after prayers. But Peter kept digging. One rainy afternoon, Peter sneaked into the library. He found a loose floorboard beneath the old theology section. Underneath, hidden in a leather pouch, were handwritten pages. Yellowed with age, the ink shaky but bold. They told a story of strange disappearances, forbidden tunnels, black sun symbols, and a chamber beneath the chapel. They were signed, J. Kennedy. Peter read every word, and when he finished, he did something bold. He climbed the stairs to the bell tower. The staircase was blocked by a wooden board nailed across the door. Peter pried it open with a rusty nail file. Dust fell from the ceiling as he stepped inside. The air smelled of ash and old metal. The tower creaked as he climbed. Each step groaned under his weight. When he reached the top, he found the bell. Massive, silent, covered in strange carvings, and standing beside it was Elias Pike. Or what remained of him. He was taller now, thinner, pale as bone. His lips were still sewn shut, but his eyes were wide open. He raised one hand and pointed at Peter. Peter stumbled back, heart racing. The bell began to hum. Soft, at first, then louder, a sound deep enough to rattle bones. Elias stepped forward, but not to attack. He placed a hand on the bell, and suddenly, Peter saw things. A flash of the black-robed priests. The gate beneath the earth. The faceless shadows behind the mirror. And Joseph, running, screaming, vanishing into the woods. Elias's voice echoed in Peter's head. The gate is waking. Then the sound stopped. Elias was gone, and the bell was cracked. Right down the middle. Peter ran, down the tower, across the hall, into the dormitory. He found an old journal among Joseph's notes. It mentioned something Elias had once circled. When the bell breaks, the gate opens. Peter didn't understand it all. But he knew one thing. The silence was ending, and Sacred Heart Seminary was not safe anymore. That night, Peter packed a bag. But when he tried to leave, he found every gate locked. The walls too high to climb. And from the chapel, he heard something new. Chanting, low, deep, growing louder, as if it came from beneath the earth. Next up. Part 9, Voices Beneath the Floor. Peter discovers the secrets hidden under Sacred Heart and comes face to face with a darkness that refuses to stay buried. Would you like me to continue with Part 9? The Lost Souls of Sacred Heart Seminary. Part 9, Voices Beneath the Floor. Peter Graves didn't sleep that night. The chanting from the chapel began after midnight. It wasn't in English, or Latin, or anything he recognized. It was deeper, older. Like the sound of the earth remembering something it tried to forget. The other boys lay still in their bunks, eyes shut tight, pretending not to hear. But Peter knew they were awake. Because when the voices rose in pitch, some of them wept. By morning, Peter had a plan. He'd go back to the tunnels Joseph described in his hidden notes. Back beneath the chapel, back to where it all began. He waited until the evening meal, then slipped out through the kitchen. Past the cellar, down the narrow corridor behind the supply closet. The trapdoor was still there, half covered by a loose rug. He pried it open. The stone steps below were cold and damp, worn smooth by decades of footsteps. He descended in silence. The tunnel walls were etched with strange symbols. Circles inside triangles. Black suns. Arrows pointing downward. Peter moved quickly, candle shaking in his hand. Soon he reached the bone room. The same altar Joseph had described still stood in the center. Only now, it was covered with blood. Fresh, still wet. Peter backed away, but a sound stopped him. Not the chanting this time. A whisper. Right beneath his feet, he knelt, pressed his ear to the floor, and heard voices, dozens of them, crying, praying, pleading, "Help us, still here, they took our names, we never left." Peter leapt back, the floor beneath the altar was hollow. Dash dash dash, he searched the room and found a metal ring, half buried in dust. A trapdoor. With a deep breath, he pulled. The door creaked open, stairs led even deeper, swallowed by darkness. He descended. Dash dash dash, the chamber of silence was real. Wider than Peter imagined, lined with rotting pews and broken crucifixes. Along the far wall stood an arch of black stone. The gate, it shimmered like oil on water. And in front of it knelt Elias Pike. Still alive, still bound, eyes wide, lips unsewn, but he made no sound. He pointed to the floor. Peter stepped closer and saw them. Dozens of robes, abandoned, torn, beside them, bones, some small, some shattered, names carved into skulls, all familiar. Michael Brennan, Thomas Gallagher, Joseph Kennedy. Peter turned to run, but the chanting returned. From the shadows emerged the 12 black-robed priests. Their faces were gone, smooth, like melted wax. One stepped forward and reached out a hand. Peter didn't wait. He grabbed a rusted crucifix from the wall and hurled it at the gate. The metal struck the stone, and the entire room screamed. Not the people, the walls, the ceiling, the gate itself. Cracks split across the arch. The air grew thick and bitter, like burning sulfur. Elias looked up, and for the first time, he spoke. "You must finish what Joseph could not." Dash dash dash. Peter grabbed a torch and ran to the base of the gate. There, in the stone, was a shallow groove, filled with black wax. A seal. He remembered Joseph's notes. When the bell cracks, the seal weakens. But only fire can break it. Peter dropped the torch into the wax. Flames erupted. The gate shrieked. The black-robed priests dissolved into ash. The chamber shook. Stone fell from the ceiling. Peter ran. He reached the tunnel stairs as the earth began to quake behind him. Behind him, the gate shattered. And the voices beneath the floor fell silent. Dash dash dash. Back in the chapel, no one moved. The altar was cold. The painting of the Virgin was gone. The bell tower's windows exploded outward in a blast of wind and smoke. Peter walked outside, breathless. Above him, the sky cleared for the first time in months. And from the ruins behind him, only silence remained. But not peace. Because Sacred Heart Seminary was never built for peace. Dash dash dash. Next up. Part 10, The Final Confession. The truth behind Sacred Heart's founding is revealed, and Peter makes a choice that will decide whether the darkness returns. Would you like me to continue with Part 10, the ending? The Lost Souls of Sacred Heart Seminary. Part 10, The Final Confession. Dash dash dash. 3 days after the gate shattered, Peter was found wandering along the riverbank. Drenched, exhausted, eyes hollow, a local farmer spotted him and took him to the sheriff's office. The priest who came to collect him was not from Sacred Heart. Because Sacred Heart Seminary was gone. Reduced to rubble. No fire was reported. No explosion. Just a collapse, they said. The ground opened up and swallowed the building whole. No survivors. No bodies. Not a single stone left standing. Dash dash dash. Peter was taken to a hospital. He didn't speak for a week. Then one night, he asked for pen and paper. And he began to write. Dash dash dash. He wrote everything. About the gate. The black-robed priests. The boys who vanished. The voices in the floor. The paintings that changed when no one watched. The silence in the bell tower. And what Elias told him in the final moment, before the gate crumbled and the chamber caved in. They were never priests. They were keepers. And the seminary was never built to save souls, it was built to feed something. Dash dash dash. Peter sent the letter to the Bishop of Pennsylvania. It never reached him. It vanished. Just like the seminary. Just like Joseph. Elias. All of them. But Peter kept a copy. He buried it in the hollow of an old oak tree near the river. Along with Joseph's journal and a cracked piece of black stone from the gate. He never went back to school. Never spoke of Sacred Heart again. He lived a quiet life. As a carpenter. Married. Had children. Grew old. But on his last day, at age 79, he whispered something to his grandson. If they ever build a church there again, don't go in. Dash dash dash. Years passed. The land was sold. Developers planned a retreat center. But during construction, the ground opened again, swallowing a bulldozer and 2 workers. They said it was a sinkhole. The project was abandoned. Locals still say nothing grows on that hill. And on cold nights, some swear they hear chanting beneath the earth. Very faint, very old, still waiting, The end. Folded hands. If you enjoyed The Lost Souls of Sacred Heart Seminary, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more haunting tales, share it with horror lovers, and comment your favorite moment below. More chilling stories are coming soon.